Hello and welcome to PSA's Let's Squawk About It, the series where we sit down with poultry scientists to discuss topics of interest and issues facing the poultry science industry. Earlier this summer, the USDA announced that it would be working to implement a multi step effort aiming to strengthen the substantiation of animal raising claims. This is an expansion of the work the USDA has already undertaken to protect consumers from false and misleading food labels. Our guest today is Marisa Erasmus with Purdue University Animal Sciences. Marissa, welcome to the show. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your area of expertise?
Sure. Hi, and thanks so much, Sam, for having me today. I'm Marissa. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Animal Sciences at Purdue University. My research focuses on studying how the environment and management of animals impacts their behavior, welfare, and productivity. So I mainly study things with feathers, so laying hens, turkeys, chickens, ducks, and sometimes venture into other animal species as well. I also do extension work here at Purdue, so providing training and educational topics for both the public and poultry producers. And this is done through some organizations as well, such as the Poultry Extension Collaborative, of which I am a member. And then I also teach at Purdue. So I teach animal behavior and animal welfare and an intro poultry course with my colleague, Dr. Liz Karcher.
Wonderful. Well, Marissa, we're happy to have you on the show. And today we're talking about these food label claims and some of the changes that are coming. And you're giving us answers from an animal welfare perspective and kind of diving into like what some of these things mean. So let's start by talking about current claims such as like grass-fed and free range in particular. These are claims that must pass USDA approval before they can be included on food labels. So what do we know about the impact on free range on a bird's overall welfare?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, these types of claims that deal with how animals are raised do need to pass through the Food Safety Inspection Service, which is an agency within the USDA. And so for these claims to be approved, they do need to be submitted along with some documentation to the USDA. When it comes to free range and caged housing systems, particularly for laying hens, there is a lot of variation in the different types of housing systems that we have. So even within free range, we do see some variation in terms of what that might look like. So in the US, we've been transitioning away from conventional cages, which provide the hens with water and food. They're in a climate controlled building, but they don't have resources like perches, nests, and scratch pads and areas for the birds to forage or dust bathe. We know from some research that's been done that nesting, dust bathing, foraging, and perching are 4 behavioral priorities for hens. And so with free range housing systems, there is the added benefit of these systems providing the hens with opportunities to perform those types of behaviors, depending on how the systems are set up and what kinds of resources and substrates they provide to the hens. So with free range, birds do need to have continuous outdoor access. However, that doesn't mean that they're always outside. Mm-hmm. And there's also some individual variability among hens. So we might see that a lot of the hens do go outside, but they vary in how often they go outside, how long they go outside for. And there may also be a small population of hens within that flock that just don't go outside, that choose to stay indoors. Mm-hmm. And this could be linked with their personality. So we do see some personality differences as well. So when it comes to free range, as I mentioned, there are these behavioral opportunities that we don't see in conventional cage systems. However, there are some health risks with free range systems that may be greater risks than what we would find in conventional systems. Mm-hmm. So these include things like heat stress or cold stress, depending on the geographic location, season, and things like that. There may also be higher predation risks because there are predators outside. So depending on how that system is set up and whether predators can access the birds or not, that could be an issue. There may be more parasites outdoors than what you might find in a caged system. And then depending on the indoor part of that free range system, right? So there's still an indoor barn area that the birds need to access. And depending on how that system's set up, we may see some differences in air quality and so on indoors, right? So of course, yes, when they go outside, if they use the outdoor space, there are other features that can encourage them to go outside. So how that space is designed and whether or not there are shelters for the birds to use, natural tree cover to help them feel more secure, and just the number of birds as well can influence this. So overall, when comparing free range and caged housing systems, there are some, a lot of differences and a lot of variability. But from a behavior standpoint, we do see some more opportunities on the free range side. From a health standpoint, there are some risks that we see on with free range that we don't always see with cage systems.
Right. So whenever you see free range on the food labels, it means these birds were raised in a housing system that allows them to go outside. They're not in a caged environment that's providing them with food, water, and the things that they need. They're given access to those other behavioral impulses that you had mentioned with like dusting and perching and things like that. So those are the main differences between the two.
Yeah. Yep.
And so when we look at this announcement from the USDA, one common claim is raised without antibiotics. So what are some of the current misrepresentations that align with this claim regarding animal welfare? And what about other food labels that you may want to touch on? What do they mean?
Yeah, sure. So raised without antibiotics means that those animals were not given antibiotics during their lifetime, right? And so many people associate this with the food products potentially being healthier for human consumption. And so on the animal welfare standpoint, from an animal welfare standpoint, it gets a little bit fuzzy because it doesn't necessarily mean that those animals were healthier and didn't need to be given antibiotics. It just means that they were not given antibiotics at any point during production. According to the USDA, if animals are being raised without antibiotics, but they are sick and do need to be treated, then of course treatment should be provided. It should not be withheld. From an animal welfare standpoint, withholding antibiotic treatment when animals are sick is obviously going to have, negative detrimental animal welfare impacts on those animals. So that's not to say that food that isn't labeled as not having antibiotics is not safe for consumption. It is. So when our food goes into the production chain, animals that have been treated with antibiotics do go through a mandatory withdrawal period so that any antibiotic residues leave their system before those animals make it into the food chain. Right? So any other food that we're consuming does not have antibiotic residues in it.
Absolutely. And that's something that we've talked about with some other guests on our show that, when consumers are purchasing these products, when they eat them, they're not eating food that has antibiotic residue in them, like you mentioned. And I think that's an important thing to emphasize, that even if an animal is treated with antibiotics, the end product that you're purchasing doesn't have those antibiotics in them.
Right, exactly. So here in the US, we can be pretty sure that the food that we're consuming is safe for human consumption. Animal welfare is kind of a tricky subject because people have a lot of different views and perspectives when it comes to animal welfare, and their own views influence how they purchase, what they purchase, what they consume. And so with antibiotic resistance being such a big issue, there's a lot of research going on trying to look into alternatives. So things like probiotics, prebiotics, and phytogenic feed additives, so plant-based additives. And there is some research showing that some of these can have beneficial effects in terms of animal welfare. So by reducing stress, helping animals cope better with heat stress, potentially, helping with foot pad dermatitis, potentially even improving productivity. There are a lot of different products out there. I'm not a microbiologist or a nutritionist, so I'll leave that discussion to those better equipped to handle that. But it does seem like there are some, benefits to be reaped here by looking at some of these other feed additives, especially in terms of the gut health and the gut microbiome, a lot that we still don't yet understand. And there's a huge gap here and a huge opportunity for more work to actually look at this intersection between nutrition, gut health, and animal welfare. That I think would be a huge benefit to the field of poultry science and consumers and producers as well.
Yep, absolutely. And it's something that we see coming through our journals a lot of research in this area. So it's an ongoing topic and definitely something that we're going to see more research coming on in the future. So
definitely.
So another thing we want to touch on is some food products may feature a seal associated with animal welfare certification organizations. However, this could lead to the misinterpretation that similar food product by a competitor without that seal has been raising animals inhumanely. Can you touch on this misunderstanding? Because just because a food product doesn't have that label doesn't necessarily mean that an animal was raised inhumanely.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past few years, we've seen that consumer demand for animal welfare has increased dramatically. And along with that, we've seen that the number of animal welfare certification organizations and associated food labels has also increased. So we have a lot of choice. We have a lot of products that do have labels and seals on them. And then we have products that don't always have those seals on them.
Mm-hmm.
So just as we've seen the animal welfare certification organizations increasing in number, individual companies that produce food have also been hiring animal welfare managers and specialists who help develop standard operating procedures and animal welfare protocols to ensure that animals are being treated humanely and appropriately. We've also seen that those companies do have their own internal animal welfare audits and procedures as well. They just may not be associated with a seal or a food label. So it's not just because they're not choosing to go with a third-party auditor to verify that they're following the standards of another organization does not mean that they're producing their animals inhumanely.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have some confidence that the food that we're producing here in the US is raised humanely. And again, there's a lot of choice for consumers. And so a lot of these organizations have their own standards. And so it's kind of up to the consumer to read up about what those mean and see how those fit with their own views and perspectives around animal welfare. So yeah, there's a lot going on in the animal welfare space. There's been a lot of demand for it. We've seen a lot of companies publicly talking about animal welfare, putting things on their websites. And so I think it's been hugely rising in the past few years, which has been great to watch.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. And we, like I said, with some of the research we see coming out of antibiotic and antibiotic alternatives, we also see a lot of research being done around animal welfare. And obviously this is an area you work in too, so you see it as well.
Yep, keeps me busy.
Well, Marisa, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this topic. Before we sign off here, is there anything else you would like to say or plug any opportunities coming your way that you'd like our viewers to know about?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Sam. It's been great talking with you this morning. And yeah, I just want to say I'm part of the Poultry Extension Collaborative. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a website where we provide resources for anyone interested in poultry. We're also open to suggestions. So if anyone wants to just drop us an email and let us know what they're interested in, that would be great to hear.